Beginnings and Movement of Religious Orders in Hammonton, 1820 to 1920. This photo depicts the sawmill located at Coffin's Mill. It was this sawmill that initially provided employment for the men of the village. Note the location at red number 1 on the map at the foot of Coffin's Mill Pond, now Hammonton Lake. Evidence indicates, in 1814, the first church and school was a log cabin built by William Coffin and known as the Schoolhouse by the Lake. Religious meetings had their beginnings in Hammonton as early as the 1820s through the late 1890s. Numerous religious orders can all trace their origins to this time period, including the Methodists, Presbyterians, Baptists, Episcopalians, Catholics, Universalists, Unitarian Society, Spiritualists, and the First Church of Christ. The earliest religious meetings took place in the private homes of townspeople living around the lake. These meetings were not always consistent in format, frequency, or clergy. However, organized gatherings can be attributed to the Methodists as early as 1827. Records indicate Methodist services were held by a traveling minister in Charlotte Speakman's General Store on Pleasant Mills Road. Refer again to the map of Coffin's Mill and its proximity to Speakman's General Store, red number 2. Later, around 1857, a cabin in the woods about 1 mile west of Coffin's Mill and Hammonton Lake was the home of a primitive combined school and church. The location is identified as red number 3. Unfortunately, no structural remains of the small church have ever been identified. However, multiple grave sites, now surrounded by only an iron fence, mark the believed location of a cemetery, church, and school. In 1858, Methodist services were held in a shanty on Bellevue Avenue. A traveling preacher conducted services every 2 weeks, as well as providing services in nearby Waterford and Winslow. By 1861, parishioners moved to a nearby general store owned by George Elvins, one of the early fathers of Hammonton. The store was located at the intersection of Main Road, now Whitehorse Pike, and Bellevue Avenue, red number 4. A new and permanent pastor was paid $100 per year, and the congregation numbered 120. Finally, in 1866, the First Methodist Church, a 2-story building, opened its doors on Bellevue Avenue. Number 5 identifies the location of this church. A sketch of the original church is shown. The Methodist Church became well known for providing Sunday school for the children of the parish. Sunday school classes, first fostered by the Methodists, became a valued addition to their religious teachings, and they were later joined by the Presbyterians in combined Sunday school classes. Even then, however, it was recognized that the center of town was developing further south, towards the Camden Atlantic Railroad. Funds were raised to move the existing church. However, the idea later abandoned as impractical. The cornerstone of a new church was laid in 1891, red number 6, using the timbers of the previously dismantled church. Between 1890 and 1893, the congregation had doubled in size. In 1903, a special reopening of the Methodist Church was held and celebrated by a burning of the mortgage. As can be seen in the circa 1920s photo, the church's architecture boasted a very tall steeple and bell tower. Unfortunately, the steeple was later damaged. It was first shortened, then removed in 1936. The steeple now appears as shown, but the original bell still tolls on Sundays in the bell tower and is the only church bell heard in Hammonton today. The Presbyterian Church was also founded in the early 1860s and met in the Union Hall in the town center, shown as green number 1. By 1866, the young congregation of 28 parishioners celebrated its first Sabbath in its newly built church, identified as green number 2. The church was built free of debt. As with the Methodists, the Presbyterians recognized the movement of the population of the town nearer the railroad and the need to move the congregation nearer to the center of town. The Presbyterians were also trying to reach out to other developing communities by establishing mission churches in several locations. For example, the growing number of Italians in Hammonton necessitated the need to establish the Italian Evangelical Presbyterian Church. They physically moved their original 26-year-old church to the location on the map on Tilton Street, shown as green number 3. The building is now in private hands. The present Presbyterian Church, green number 4, had its cornerstone laid in 1896. A photo of the newly constructed brick church is shown. The church has had several renovations, including the large 1960 educational building. The church will soon celebrate its 130th anniversary. The Baptists also started services in Hammonton officially in 1859, and like the Methodists and Presbyterians, did not have an actual church to worship in. Area homes held services, as did Elvin's General Store. By 1862, the congregation grew to a point where additional space was needed, and the First Baptist Church was constructed on Bellevue Avenue, purple number 1 on the map. The church prospered under the direction of a faithful pastor who never requested a salary. In 1885, the Baptist Church was also physically moved to a central location in town at 3rd and Vine Streets. An addition was constructed in 1907 and celebrated by the 116-member congregation. This year, 2025, marks the 140th anniversary of the current church. The original structure of the church is still recognizable at the same location, purple number 2. Like the Baptists, Episcopalian services began in the home of a gentleman on Hammonton Lake. It was not until 1871 that public services moved to the First Presbyterian Church. The congregation grew to 140, and funds were secured to build the First Episcopal Church. Later that year, the cornerstone of the church was laid on the south side of town near the railroad tracks at 12th and Washington Streets. Although services did commence in 1871, the consecration of the church did not occur until 10 years later, and a rectory was then added in 1889. Refer to the map on the left and the black number 1. Note the proximity of this church to the Camden Atlantic Railroad and the Reading Railroad. In 1921, St. Mark's Episcopal Church from Pleasantville purchased the property belonging to the Universalist Church, more centrally located at Peach Street and Central Avenue, black number 2 on the right-hand map. The old Episcopal Church on Washington was torn down, and the stone used to construct a new sanctuary added to the Universalist Church. The church was later sold to the Roman Catholic Church, and the Episcopalian congregation disbanded. Catholic religious services found their roots somewhat later in early Hammonton, circa 1880, in the home of a resident in Hammonton. Well-known contractor William Burns House constructed the first St. Joseph's Church in 1886 on 3rd Street, shown as Blue Number 1. The pews and a large painting of the Crucifixion came from a declining parish in Pleasant Mills. The Mother Mary and Christ child, seen on the right, is still present in the church and the center focus of the annual Feast of Mount Carmel celebration. The parish saw many changes in clergy during its early years, and it was not until 1903 that St. Joseph's held its first Holy Communion class, consisting of 24 children. A new church was dedicated and built in 1919, and the Catholic religion subsequently grew to be one of the most successful in Hammonton during the 20th century. Other religious orders, such as the Spiritualists and Universalists, with many prominent persons in town as parishioners, were very influential in early Hammonton. Their places of worship served as women's social circles, lecture halls for many types of public meetings, and stages for various forms of entertainment. However, the religious practices of these early groups declined in popularity and were no longer present in the community by the 1920s. Thank you for your attention.